All right, everybody. Thank you so much. David G, and I'm an alcoholic, and very grateful to be here with you guys tonight. Really grateful to be a part of this fellowship of recovering people. It's always a great honor to come out and get to do one of these, and I'm so thankful, very thankful, Ashley, for your service. Dennis T, as always, thank you so much, brother, for all that you do for the fellowship and program. It's amazing. And a big thank you to all of you for being here as well, because without you, none of this would be possible. So thank you for taking an hour out of your time to come out and join in with us tonight. We've been looking at the big book for the last couple of weeks. We've really been rolling through the editions, the first, the preface, the first, the second, the third edition, and this week we've landed in the fourth. I'm kind of excited to get through those and move into the doctor's opinion, which, we'll be doing here in just a little bit. So I'm really grateful to be here tonight. And as Ashley said, I am an alcoholic and an addict. And as she said as well, through the grace of a kind and loving God that revealed himself to me through this book. I've been sober in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous since August 8th, 1994. I'm a grateful recovering member of Sexaholics Anonymous, where I have a sobriety date in that fellowship as well of October 1st, 2019. So going to the foreword to the first edition, which XXIII in the big book, we will take a look starting right there at the front of it. And we'll just roll through this and share experience, strength, and hope. I do always like to say before I start one of these, please remember this. I'm not the guru of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Please feel free to agree or disagree with anything I say here tonight. If your sponsor says something or tells you something different than what you hear from me, your sponsor is right. You should always listen to your sponsor. I'm just someone who has found a way to read and understand and study the big book in a very simple way and to pass that message along to others. And we begin to see a lot of recovery take place as a result of that. So all of that is thanks to God, not David G, I promise you. So let's start right here with the foreword to the fourth edition. This fourth edition of Alcoholics Anonymous came off the press in 2001. At the start of a new millennium, since the third edition was published in 1976, worldwide membership of AA has just about doubled to an estimated 2 million or more, with nearly 100,800,000 groups meeting in approximately 150 countries around the world. Now, in 2013, when I did some studies on this, at that time it was 173, not 150. I'm sure it's more than that now. However, this is going to really show us where the literature has played such a major role, and it always has. I think where our fellowship got off track is whenever they began to close the literature or the fellowships that they were attending, and they began to do things unknowingly from the fellowship. 90 meetings, 90 days, that's a good thing. I would never tell anybody not to do that. But if you put that in the place of doing what this book says to do, then I think we've made a huge mistake. My early sponsor was Charlie P. of Joe and Charlie, and he used to always tell me, David, about 10% of the people in the fellowship as a whole have recovered by the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The other 90% is fellowship. He said that is not the newcomer's fault. That's the old timer. It was up to us to bring this message to them and deliver it exactly the way that it's written. And when we don't do that and we back off and we allow other things to come in and water down our message, then that's not their fault. That's what they've been taught. That's our fault. So I see that not as a newcomer's problem. I see that as an old-timer's problem. So it says literature has played a major role in AA's growth, and striking phenomenon of the past quarter century has been the explosion of translations of our basic literature into many languages and dialects. In country after country where the AA seed was planted, it has taken root. Look at that promise. What a promise. Slowly at first, then growing by leaps and bounds. When literature has become available, currently Alcoholics Anonymous has been translated into 43 languages. I worked oil field for many years, and I spent a lot of time down in West Texas. And I remember one night going into a meeting, and there's a lot of Hispanic people in the West Texas area. So I walked into a meeting with Alcoholics Anonymous. There was a guy there very frustrated because he couldn't speak English. And he couldn't understand what we were reading, but he knew the answer was there. He could feel the power and the energy in the room. And so I tried to talk to him, but I didn't understand him, and he didn't understand me. And I could see where he was very frustrated. So what happened when I came back to Oklahoma on my days off, I stopped by one of the local bookstores there in Tulsa, Oklahoma, And I picked up a pocket-sized book that was written in Spanish of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I went back to there, I was hoping to see that man again. And sure enough, when he walked into the room that night, I laid the book down in front of him. He looked at it. He opened it up. He looked at the book. He looked at me. He looked at the book. He looked at me. And I pointed to where we were at. And he began to understand. Even though I couldn't speak to him and he couldn't speak to me, we began to look at the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous together. Very beautiful thing happened. The last time I checked was about 2 or 3 months ago. And at the time that this took place was almost 10 years ago. This man is still sober today. Now, is it because I brought him the book? Probably not. It's because God opened his eyes to see what was in the book. I didn't know what to do with the man. Nobody else knew what to do with him, but God knows what to do. This is very powerful, very powerful. As the message of recovery, which we know to be laid out in our big book, has reached larger numbers of people, it has also touched the life of vastly a greater variety of suffering alcoholics. Now, we're not only talking about those that are outside of the rooms. Many of these are inside of the rooms. I know for myself, at 24 years of sobriety, very active member of Alcoholics Anonymous, very active in sharing the book and what I understood about the book from Charlie and all of this. I found myself at an emotional bottom in 2019, which brought me to my knees. By the grace of kind and loving God, I came back and went through this literature again, had a new experience, and have walked free from all of those afflictions ever since. So the power in this book is miraculous. So it's touched the lives of a vastly greater variety of suffering alcoholics. When the phrase, "we are people who normally would not mix," page 17 of this book, which is the chapter "There is a Solution," was written in 1939. It referred to a fellowship composed largely of men and a few women with quite similar social, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. Like so much of AA's basic text, those words have proved to be far more visionary than the founding members could have ever imagined. I've seen that happen from 2019. The message that I came back with, the experience that I had in 2019 after 24 years of having a profound spiritual experience in 1994 and carrying that forward all the way, and then ending up losing that because lust and other emotional problems come in and took me out. Coming back through that and being able to share that with addicts everywhere, I've seen the same thing happen in my very own life and the lives of many of the men, and some of them are here tonight. So like it says, it is far more visionary than the founding members could have ever imagined. We're seeing that happen in our own lives today. The stories added to this edition represent the membership. There again, we've looked at this over and over. That's the only reason that the stories are in the book. They represent a membership, period, whose characteristic of age, gender, race, culture have widened and deepened to encompass virtually everyone the first 100 members could have hoped to reach. While our literature has preserved the integrity of the AA message, which is laid out in our big book, that's what we're going to be looking at from the weeks to come right here. Look at this promise. Sweeping changes in society as a whole are reflected in new customs and practices within the fellowship, taking advantage of technological advances. For example, AA members with computers can participate in meetings online. We look at that today. That's just the way it is. I mean, thank God. As bad as COVID was for so many people, thank God it came along when it did. It saved my life because I was in a place to where I really wasn't asked to come back to very many places in person anymore. And whenever I began to join online meetings and I started bringing this message to other people in other fellowships, what a beautiful thing that has turned out to be. So sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country and around the world, any meeting, anywhere, AA share experience, strength, and hope. My sponsor told me, I want you to share your experience, strength, and hope, not your ideas about how a group can get better or what they need to do to then know. You share experience, strength, and hope as outlined in this book, nothing else. It says, with each other in order to stay sober and help other alcoholics, modem to modem or face-to-face, AA speak the language of the heart with all its power and simplicity. And I think that's what we're going to begin to look at as we move out of the forewords into the doctor's opinion and to the rest of this. I was talking to a good friend of mine the other day who has been through this process of the work with me. And he said to me then, if they only knew what was to come in the rest of these chapters, it would just be unbelievable. Well, we're going to get to take a look at that. We are. And it's like it says, it's the language of the heart and all its power and simplicity. If this wasn't simplistic, I promise you I couldn't have stayed here for this long, and I sure wouldn't have been interested in it for as long as I have, for almost 3 decades now. So I'm grateful that we've looked at the additions, but I'm glad that we're out of it. We're going to start to look now at the doctor's opinion. For many years, I used to wonder, why is it that some people can do things that I can't? Why is it that some people can drink a 6-pack of beer and not drink another one for 6 months? I drink a 6-pack of beer. It's 6 months before I stop drinking. Why? What's wrong with me? I don't understand it. The same way whenever it came to lust and sexual acting out. Why is it that some people could do that, get a little guilt and shame going on, walk away from that and never go back to it again? Whenever I do that, I can't get away from that. It continues to come on me over and over and over. No matter how much I promise anyone, no matter how much I try, no matter what I do, I'm not able to walk away from that for any length of time. And I don't understand why. Well, thank God for this chapter, because I understood it when it came to alcohol. I've understood this for probably 27 years now, at least. I understood the alcoholic, when you put alcohol in the alcoholic's body or you put drug in the drug addict's body, I understand what happens. I get that. It's a very different thing with lust, very different thing. So we want to take a look at all of these areas, not just one or two, but we want to look at how this physical allergy, this phenomenon of craving, manifests itself against people like us and demands more of the same. And we're going to be talking about a man named Dr. Silkworth. In the 1920s, our country went through a Great Depression, and a lot of people lost a lot of money, and this little man was one of them. He took a job at Towns Hospital for $40 a week, room and board. This man became the head physician of that facility, and what he has done for Alcoholics Anonymous is beautiful. If you're new or relatively new to the program, I promise you this is going to explain things that you could not otherwise count. When I first came in, I knew that there was something wrong with me. I don't need to read a book, and I don't need to go talk to a doctor to find out that there's something wrong with David's head. I get that. I do. I'm a pretty crazy dude, but I'm not stupid. So I understood that. But what I don't understand is there's something going on in the inside of me. And whenever I partake in those activities, it triggers something within me that demands more of the same. And we're going to see how that manifests itself right here through these words. So let's take a look at the doctor's opinion. He says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader, it took me a minute to realize that was me. I always look at this as somebody else or somewhere else. My mind, the ego self, wants to take me away from everywhere but the now. But when it says that we believe the reader, I need to put my name over the top of that because I am the reader here. We'll be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in the book. Why do we push the book so hard? Why? It says right there, the plan of recovery. This is where it's described right there. If we take the words medical estimate out of it, which is very important, we shouldn't, and we never will. But it tells me right there, this is where the plan of recovery is described. It's in the book. It's described in the fellowship as well, but it's the experience of that will be very enlightening as we move through this. So it says convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who've had experience. I want to pay attention to that word. I don't want to just look at that as medical men. I want to look at that as people inside of my fellowship. I want to look at that as my sponsor. I want to know his experience. I'm grateful for the knowledge that I've been given, but I promise you self-knowledge avails us nothing here. Knowledge of self is what we should be after. I want to do that through other people's experience who has had experience with the suffering of our members. And look at this great promise, have witnessed our return to health. I don't know about you, but I'm very interested in that. Very interested. Not just to not drink anymore. If the problem's drinking, just don't drink. If the problem's drugging, just don't drug. If the problem's sex, just don't have sex. You should be all right. But if you're like me, every time you stop doing that, the problem shows up. And the problem's very mad. And it's not happy. And so whenever I look at this and it tells me that I can be returned to health, restored to health, man, what a promise. And really, that's all the word recovered means. I think people get hung up on that sometimes. Oh, my God, don't say that you're recovered. Oh, God, don't say that. But if you look the definition of that word up, it's to be restored to health from sickness. So if I can't recover here, there's no point in me being here. Now, I don't get the word recovered mixed up with the word cured. I don't ever want to put those two in the same category. That's not what it's talking about. For so long, I was told in Alcoholics Anonymous, do not talk about being recovered. Do not. When I went through this book with Charlie P. and I come back, I threw the book on the table and said, I will talk about being recovered from now on. Not from alcohol, not from drugs, not from sex, but from a hopeless state of mind that drives me to do that over and over and over. And now I know why. And we're fixing to look at it here. A well-known doctor, chief physician, this is Dr. Silkworth, at a nationally prominent hospital specializing in alcohol and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. Now, whenever I speak or I do a book study for Alcoholics Anonymous only, trust me when I say I very much respect singleness of purpose. I do. Well, people tell me all the time, I don't understand why. The big book talks about drug addiction very much right here. But if you read that very closely, it doesn't say AA specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction. It says the well-known doctor. There's a big difference in that. So this is one of two letters that he wrote. In those days, you couldn't just go somewhere and 12-step somebody. You had to have a letter signed by a doctor. Well, no doctor was going to sign anything like that. Nobody had ever recovered in the history of man from alcoholism. So, but this man did. And this was the first of those letters. And he says, to whom this may concern. And when I look at that in the first person, who does that concern? Mostly. When I go through this book with somebody, does that concern me? It better concern them. As I promise you, when I went through it with somebody, it most definitely concerned David. So to whom it may concern, it concerns David. Look at how he says I. If we circle that word or box that word in, we're going to look at his opinion alone. At this time, it was opinion. We know in 1972, it became a medical fact. They called it an illness, a disease. But in these days, they didn't. He said, this is my opinion. I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, the disease doesn't really cure how much you earn, how much you have, how much you don't. It doesn't cure if you're from Yale or if you're from jail. It just doesn't seem to matter. Was an alcoholic of a type I'd come to regard as hopeless. Now, he's talking about Bill Wilson right here. Now, in these days, this man would bring you into his hospital. He would give you the finest treatment there was of the day that he could. He would put you through, a series of detox and all of these things. And eventually he would put you down into a room on the ward and you would be released back out into the streets. And if you repeated this behavior over and over and you come back more than 3 times, he regarded you as hopeless. And when he done that, if the family would consent, he would send you to upstate New York to a wet brain clinic where you would never return to normal society ever again. You would be doing what was known as today the Thorazine shuffle, walking around in a circle with those men. And this is where Bill Wilson was headed. In fact, he talks about it in his story. He said they talked about turning me over to the asylum or the undertaker. He says, I almost welcomed the idea. So Dr. Silkworth had come to regard him as hopeless. Bill was on his way to upstate New York when this life-changing spiritual experience happened for him. So if he regarded you as hopeless, that's just the way it was. For me, I wanted to stop and I found out I could not. And everything that I tried to do, it didn't do any good. I just couldn't. So he says in the course of his 3rd treatment, remember, 3 times, 3 strikes, you're out. In the course of his 3rd treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conception to other alcoholics. I think the key word there is part. I think so much we get hung up on carry the message, carry the message, carry the message, and that's a very good thing. Don't get me wrong. We've got to do that. But it says right here that that's only part of the rehabilitation, is to commence to present our conceptions to other alcoholics. It says that Bill impressed upon them that they must do likewise with still others. And we definitely stress that very heavily in the group of men that I'm a part of today. He says this has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. Look at this beautiful sentence, and promise as well. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered, not recovering, recovered. And at that time, there were over 2 million when I went back through this book, and that's been a long time ago. He says, I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. Think about that in your own life. Let me reflect some of my experience around what that sentence says. I've been to church. I've been prayed over. I've been dunked. I've been baptized. I've been smudged with feathers by the Indians. I've sat in sweat lodges. I've talked to priests. I've done all of this stuff. Other methods had failed me completely. Why? Because this thing is such a bully, and I don't understand what it's about to trick me into. And he's going to start to talk about it here pretty quick. But he says, I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. Think about that in your own life and from your experience and answer that question. These facts, what are they? I want to know. He talked about facts. I want to know. If there's facts here that appear to be of extreme medical importance, I want to know what they are. So one of them is going to be this. If I come back up to the top of that about the middle of that last paragraph, it says that they must do likewise with still others. That's a fact. We must do this. The other is that we acquire certain ideas concerning the possible means of recovery, the second sentence in the third paragraph there. And then the last sentence in the second paragraph, where he said this man was an alcoholic of a type that I had come to regard as hopeless. These are facts. Hopeless, must do likewise with still others, and ideas concerning the possible means of recovery. So these facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibility of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark in the new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. What a statement for a doctor to make in those days for people who had never recovered in the history of man. And look at what he says on top of that. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. That's something that I love a lot of men and a lot of women and a lot of people that are in recovery, but I don't always absolutely rely on everything that they say about themselves. That's just me. He signed his name to the book. If you look at the first edition, if you're ever fortunate enough to have one or to look at one, you'll see that his name didn't appear. He would not put his name in the book. He said, my colleagues will hang me and burn me to the stake. Well, after it became a national institution, began to get a little notoriety. Yeah, I want my name in the book now. So his name is in the book, and it should be very truly yours, William B. Silkworth, MD. So this is a key paragraph. Anytime that I read this is going to really begin to give me an idea of what's been going on with David for a long, long time. This explains many things that I could have never caught with the naked eye had someone not been reading me through this book. He says, the physician who at our request gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic, you could put the word sexaholic, you could put the word drug addiction, anything in there. Those of us who have suffered from that torture must believe. I don't know about you, but I suffered a lot of torture in that area of my life, in many of those areas of my life. And the doctor is telling me that I must believe that. But he's making a statement here that's going to be very hard for me to believe. He says here that the body of the alcoholic, the drug addict, the sexaholic, whatever you want to say here, is quite as abnormal as his mind. That's a hell of a statement. How could that be? How can I be as sick in my body as I am my mind? I don't believe that. Or I didn't believe that. I believe that now, but I didn't believe it then. And I just thought there's no way. He said it did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking. Anybody ever try to tell you that? It didn't sit too well, most likely. He says, just because we were maladjusted to life, that's a question that I ask myself. Full flight from reality, there's another. Outright mental defective. Look at what he says. These things were true to some extent, in fact, to a considerable extent with some of us. But this next word is going to change the entire paragraph. But we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. And if I'm not sure of that, by the time that I go through this chapter, there's no point in me moving on with my sponsor and the rest of this work. There's just not. Because at some point, my mind is going to trick me into believing it's okay just to do one. It's okay to reach for just one. It's okay to click on that internet and just take a peek. But when I do that, it triggers something inside of me bodily that is going to set up a craving that's going to demand more and more and more. I have a daughter that lives about 89 miles away from me here. She's every one of these things. Maladjusted life, full flight from reality, outright mental defect. I mean, I love her to death, but she has got some serious issues in those areas, like many of us. But when she puts alcohol in her body, when she puts drugs in her body, whenever she acts out and it brings on shame, guilt, and remorse, she walks away from that never to return again. But when people like you and I put that inside of our body, something begins to happen to us that don't happen to the normal person. And we want more and more and more and more. Now, what I think is when I get away from that for a period of time, I think that I'm craving this. Oh, I'm craving a drink. I'm craving a drug. But I'm not. What I'm doing is I'm obsessing. What he is going to show us here that the actual craving does not start until we put it inside of our bodies. Now, I've been sober, God willing, next week will be 28 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. I could sit here tonight and wash my hands in a bowl of whiskey right here in front of me, and I promise you, it's not going to hurt me. It's not very smart to do, trust me, but it's not going to hurt me. But you let me take that, put it into my mouth and swallow it down inside of my body and watch what happens. It's going to bring on a craving for more and more and more and more. And that's exactly what he's saying here. We are sure that our bodies are sick as well. And if you're not sure of that, if you're like me, you will be sure of that before it's said and done, because the mind is going to take us to some more experimentation with that, most likely. So the mental capacity of all of this, that really doesn't have a whole lot to do with it. You and I are all different mentally. We are. The mental obsession is not what unites us. The physical allergy is. Charlie always told me that it looks like this. God forbid every one of us in here take a drink of alcohol or do a drug or whatever our drug of choice is. You're going to have a class of people over here that are crying in their beer. You're going to have a class of people over here that are loving on the women or the men or whatever it may be. You're going to have some guys in here ready to fight. Mentally, we're all going to have a different reaction whenever it comes to that. But the one thing that is going to be the same is we're going to crave more and more and more of that. That's not because of what goes on in our mind. That's what goes on as a result of putting it in our body. And he says it right there. We are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. And look at this statement. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic, drug addict, sexaholic, overeater, undereater, whatever it may be, which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. This is why I could never get sober. Because my mind would tell me, David, we'll just have one. We're just going to stop by the bar and have one. David, we're just going to go in. We're just going to buy one hit tonight. We're going to put one hit in each nostril and we're gone. We're not coming back, I promise you. Or we're just going to peek on the internet. We're going to have a little bit of fun here. We're going to walk away. But once I do that, I take action outside of that thought. What I do is I trigger what he's fixing to talk about as an allergy. And that's going to set up a craving that's going to demand more and more and more and more. And I can't get away from that. Once I do that, all bets are off, guaranteed. So he says the doctor's theory. Now, remember, at this time, it's still his opinion. It's just theory. It's not fact yet. So his theory that we have an allergy to alcohol, drugs, whatever it may be, interests us. Does that interest me? Absolutely it does. I want to know more about this. They've got my attention now. I want to know what it's talking about. He says, as laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may, of course, mean little, but as ex-problem drinkers, lusters, druggers, what a promise. Ex-problem. Wow. That's no longer a problem. That's an ex-problem now in my life. Thank God. We can say that his explanation makes good sense, does it? Does this make good sense to me? This idea of the allergy, it absolutely makes good sense. I've been told a lot of things. But when I look back on my experience with this, I can promise you everything that he's talking about here is true. I put alcohol in my body. I want more and more and more. I put drugs in my arm or in my veins or inside of my body. I want more and more and more. I activate lust within. It's triggered and it's gone. It makes good sense. It says it explains many things for which we could not otherwise account. Absolutely it does. Absolutely. This is why mentally I could never overcome it, because the mind would always tell me it's okay. We need a little release. And we would try a little release and trigger an allergy, and here we go. He says, though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as the altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. More often than not, it is imperative, key word there, that a man's brain be cleared before he's approached, is then he has a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. What do we have to offer here? We have a program as outlined in this book that will lead you to freedom no matter what your addiction is. Because addiction is the flea, self is the bug. You attach the flea to the bug, you've just amplified it. You take away the flea, the bug gets bigger and bigger. It doesn't leave you alone until it draws back the flea. This goes on endlessly. So what we're looking to do here is to recover from a hopeless state of mind known as self. As we begin to continue to go throughout this book, we're going to look at thoughts, ideas, concepts, beliefs, prejudice, all of these things that have grown in us to the point to where we do what it says to do, and we don't even know we're doing that. It's insanity. It's total insanity. But look at what he says. He says it's an imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he's approached. Then he has a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. And for anybody that may have just joined, we're on Roman numeral page 27, XXIII in the doctor's opinion. I used to sponsor men that would come in. They wouldn't have any time at all, or they'd relapse. And they'd come back and they'd want to pick up where they were and go again. And, you know, we tried that for a while and it just didn't seem to work out. One day I was talking with my sponsor in disgust, and I said, man, I don't get it. I don't get it. And he said, what don't you get? I said, man, these guys come in, you know, they'll have alcohol on their breath or whatever, you know, and man, I swoop them up and love on them as best I can. And I will take them to some meetings and I'll set them down and start to put them into the book. And he said, hold up. What do you mean you put them into the book? And I said, I put them into the book and begin to try to carry the message to them so that they can get sober. And he said, and they're fresh off of a relapse. And I said, yeah. He brought me back to this page, Roman numeral 26 at the very bottom of the page. It is imperative, imperative that a man's brain be clear before he's approached with this message, not with us, not with meetings, not with this message. Because then he's going to have a better chance of understanding and accepting what we offer. And that's the program of recovery here. I can't give it to him if he's still under the influence. I just can't. Maybe you can. I hope so. Let me know how that works out if you do. So the doctor writes, and we're going to look at the second letter here. The subject presented in this book, key words right there, this book, love the fellowship. I'm not talking smack about the fellowship at all. There's a big difference between the fellowship and the program of recovery, and the program of recovery is outlined in this book. So the subject presented in this book seems to be paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction or whatever your addiction may be. There should be a question mark there. I asked my guys to put a question mark there. Is that us? Here it is again, I. Now, he's talking alone here. I say this after many years of experience, not just knowledge, but experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country, treating alcoholic and drug addiction. There it is again. But this is coming from Silkworth, not Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole. There was therefore a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail. And look at these key words right here in these pages, because that's absolutely where it's at. There are other books that are very helpful. I get a lot of good information from those. And I'm not saying anything about any other book, but I'm just saying for me, if I want a subject which is covered in masterly detail, then I'm going to find it in these pages right here. Now look at this word, we. Something has changed from I to we. I don't know how much time had taken place in here, but he's no longer talking alone now. He's talking with some people behind him. Other people have begun to pick up on this idea and say, you know what, there may be something to this allergy thing. He says, we doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics. He knew that. I mean, he would watch people come in and out of his hospital, people like you and I. He would sober us up. We'd go back out into the street. The mind would trick us into taking a drink. That would trigger the allergy. We'd be gone forever and ever and ever until we came back again. He's seen this over and over. He would see his own staff. He would watch them. Their mind would tell them it was okay to go out and take a drink. They'd go out and take a drink. They'd be okay. They'd go home. They'd go to bed. They'd get up. They'd come back to work the next morning. He began to realize there's something different between these men that I'm treating and releasing. What's the difference here? And he began to put together the idea that it was bodily as well as mentally. He said, because mentally, their mind tells them to go drink. With my staff, mentally, the mind tells them to go drink. But what happens is when these men put it in their body, something happens to them that don't happen to these men over here. And these men do it. They're able to go to bed, get up, go to work, and go on and carry on their life. These men are gone until God knows when, until they're back again. And so, yeah, he really began to understand. So he says some sort of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics. But its application presented difficulties beyond our conception with our ultra-modern standard. Now look at the word our. He's not talking along there. He's talking about himself and other doctors there. Our, there it is again. Scientific approach to everything. We're not perhaps well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. We are beyond human aid. In other words, is what he's trying to say. I don't know how to treat these men in that area of life. He says many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book came under our care, and in this hospital, while here, he acquired some ideas. Key word right there, ideas. Now, his ideas had led him to drunkenness for years and years and years. All of a sudden, he's had an experience, and now his ideas are somewhat different. Remember, ideas, concepts, beliefs, attitudes, prejudice. That's what we're going to be looking at throughout this entire book. Once those change, we automatically change. As a man thinketh, so is he. It has to change. My thinking changed, my actions changed. It has to. So what we're looking to do is have the same experience that this man had, and we can do that through the process of the work as outlined in this book. He puts them into practical application at once. So later he requests the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients, and here with some misgiving, we consent it. Again, we're talking about Bill Wilson. The cases we have followed through with have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive. That could never be an active alcoholic drunk. I'm a selfish, self-centered man. I want everything right now for me. But when I have this experience, what he just described there is exactly what happens to me. The unselfishness of these men as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive. Last year, I worked with at least 30 men, 5 men a day, every day for 5 days a week. And that was a lot of hours. I was not in that for any other reason other than to help those men to have an experience and to continue to live in one myself. There was no profit motive there at all. It says their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in this alcoholic field. And if you are sponsored like that, you will understand that completely. But look at what it says. They believe, key word right there, believe in themselves. Now, there was a time that I didn't believe very much in you, and I sure didn't believe very much in me. But once I've had this experience, I believe in myself now, and still more in the power, which pulls chronic alcoholic, drug addicts, and sex addicts back from the gates of death. What a beautiful thing that is. Now, of course, an alcoholic, drug addict, whatever it may be, ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor. And this often requires a definite hospital procedure. Remember, he would bring you in, give you the best treatment of the day that he could. But he says that must be before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol, drugs, whatever you may say here, on these chronic alcoholics is the manifestation of an allergy. How does that manifest in me? Well, once I put it inside of my body, it's going to manifest more and more and more and more. Think about it. Those of us who have been in recovery for a while, or even for a long, long time, and all of a sudden we let up on our spiritual life and we begin to slide backwards just a little bit in our thinking. And one day our mind tells us it's all right just to go take a peek or just maybe to have a sip. And we buy into that lie and we put that inside of our body. That's going to manifest itself by demanding more of the same. My mind at that point is not going to leave me alone. And even if it does tell me, David, we really shouldn't be doing this. You probably need to get home. We're going to end up in jail again. You're going back to prison. Doesn't matter. The body says, I want more. I want more. I want more. And it's going to get more and more and more until I'm sick, drunk, and in all kinds of trouble one more time. And that's been my experience over and over and over. I don't know about you, but I know about me, and that's it. So it says the phenomenon of this craving This is very important for me. This is why they can do that. The ex-wife could drink 6 beers. 6 months later, she may have another. 6 months later, I'm still drinking. This is why I can't click onto the internet and take actions based on that and be able just to stop and walk away just like nothing ever happened. This is why right here, because the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class of people like you and I. And it never, key word right there, never occurs in the average temperate drinker, luster, drugger, whatever it may, it just does not occur in them. And if it never occurs in them, and it has ever occurred in me, even one time, then chances are I have the bug, so to speak. Because there again, if it's the only problem, just don't do it anymore. There shouldn't be any more problem, right? But this is this bugs me. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. Alcohol, drugs, sex, whatever it may be. Never safely use that in any form ever again. I can't wrap my mind around that I can never do that again, ever. So it says, once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it. Anybody have that experience in here other than me? Once having lost their self-confidence. Anybody ever have that other than me? Their reliance upon things human. Their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. And whenever I look at that sentence, reliance upon things human, that even falls under the fellowship. Now, I have to have that. Don't get me wrong. But if I'm trying to hang on to that, to get that to produce an experience for me that I'm beyond any of that, I'm just going to stay in confusion because it's never going to happen. Well, frothy emotional pill seldom suffices. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people, and we're talking about the big book here, must have depth and weight. Now, if I just read this with a naked eye, this seems like a pretty good story. But if I sit down and study this the way we're studying it here tonight, and I relate this back to my experience, I promise you I see this with new eyes now than I ever did before. It must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, they're ideals. Key word, ideals. We're going to look at that over and over and over and over through here, all the way through here. It must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their life. It's what usually happens to us in the first 9 steps. So if any feel a psychiatrist directing a hospital for alcoholics would appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand with us for a while on the firing line. See the tragedies. That's a question mark for me. I've seen that a lot as a sponsor. Despairing wife. I've seen that a lot. Little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work and even their sleeping moments, and the most cynical will not wonder why we have accepted and encouraged this movement. We feel after many years of, keyword here, experience, we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. Very important right here. I've got just a couple of minutes left, and I want to zone in on this. Men and women drink, drug, act out, whatever it may be, essentially because we like the effect. I remember telling my sponsor that's not true. I like the taste of bourbon whiskey. He said, yeah, I see you're drinking a soda there tonight. I said, yeah. He said, you drink 48 cans of that every time you stay out? I said, no. He said, do you do that with beer? I said, yeah, most of the time. He said, it doesn't have the same effect, does it? And for the first time, I understood what that sentence meant. We drink because we like the effect produced. That's why I act out. That's why I lust. That's why I do all those things. I like the effect that it produces. The sensation is so elusive that while I admit it is injurious, I cannot after time differentiate the true from the false. Everybody could see the truth about my drinking, my acting out, except me. I can't see it. I can't see it at all. Yet people had known for a long time the truth about David before he did. To them, their alcoholic lives seem to be the only normal one. So look at this. This is why we are sober. After we've had a period of sobriety, we're restless. We're going to write physical above that. The guys that I work with. Irritable, we're going to write the word mental above that. And discontented, we're going to write the word spiritual above that. And that's going to set the tone for the entire rest of the book. Physical, mental, spiritual. Physical, mental, spiritual. I'm restless, irritable, and discontent while I'm sober. Unless I can again experience the sense and ease and comfort which comes by taking a few drinks which I see others taking with impunity after I succumb to the desire again, after I go ahead and take the drink, after I go ahead and click on the internet and go all the way through with it. Once I go ahead and take the drug, After I succumb to the desire again, as so many do, then the phenomenon of craving develops. Not before. Not before. If you're sober and you think you're sitting around craving, you're not craving. You're fighting the obsession. The craving does not start until we put it within our body. Then we pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful. Anybody do that after they relapse? Anybody remorseful? With a firm resolution not to do it again. Anybody do that? This is repeated over and over. Does that happen to anybody? And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's going to be very little hope of our recovery. Very little. But on the other hand, as strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once the psychic change has occurred, the spiritual experience as a result of going through the process of the work in this book, that very same person, David or Ashley or Dennis or whoever it may be, who seemed doomed, who had so many problems they ever despaired of solving them, suddenly, we're not talking about after a while, suddenly finds herself easily able to control their desire for alcohol, sex, lust, drugs, whatever it may be. But there is a condition, and here it is. The only effort necessary being required to follow a few simple rules, and that's the rest of the work is outlined in the book. I really want to thank you for allowing me to come out here and share tonight. It's really good to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
This concludes David's share on tonight's chapter, but we encourage you to keep listening as he answers questions from the audience and shares additional experience, strength, and hope.
The doctor speaks about the unselfishness of these men, the altruistic movement, altruism, which is also selflessness, and he speaks a lot about this unselfishness. And in your experience, does that manifest itself in 12-step work or in all aspects of life?
All right. Thank you, Bakor, for your question. It's always good to see you, brother. I always appreciate your service at any meeting. For me, this is after the spiritual experience has taken place. If I'm running around, 12-stepping and doing the things that I always did, not really having an enlightened experience, I'm usually doing it for some reason, to benefit me or to help me. Or I think when he talks about the unselfishness of these men, there's only one way that happens for me, and it's described very beautifully on page 63 of our book when we look at the third step promises prior to taking that third step. That's where it really begins, the unselfishness for me. The things that I do today, I do them so that they may benefit others of thy power, love, and way of life. It's not about David G. anymore. And for me, so when he talks about the unselfishness of these men, for me, that's what he's talking about after we have had this, what at that time he called the psychic change. So anyway, that's my experience and take on that. Thank you.
Yeah, David, on the bottom of page XXIII, it says that they are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience a sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks. I notice here that comes before they take the drink. Can you share a little bit about why they're restless, irritable, and discontented and needing to take the drink in the first place?
Yeah, I can share from my experience, and it's really good to see you, Dennis, as always. Thank you for your service in all meetings, and especially this one. That irritableness, that restlessness, and that discontentment that I have from being sober. Sober is not well for a guy like me. It's just not. And it's that discontentment, that being disconnected from the power. And I need something to make that go away. And my mind will convince me that if I do this, if I go to the internet or do whatever I do, that it would be better. And I like how we read that there. It comes at once. Now that would be wonderful if it continued and it stayed, but it never does. We know that we're about to go on another round of suffering now. So in my experience, that's something. And what we do, of course, that's where our 10th step in this program is so vital, because there is where we are watching our thoughts. We're asking God to remove them. We're discussing it with another person. So that restless irritability and discontentment doesn't have to be treated with a drug or a drink or a lust drink or whatever it may be. It can be caught, it can be turned over, and we can be brought back to balance. So that's my experience on that. Thanks a lot, Dennis.
I was kind of curious about the obsession of the mind, and I've been doing some studying on it, and I have found for me that obsession of the mind can come along without the drug even being near me. If I am not spiritually fit, and it brings on my self-will, and my brain gets overwhelmed. Do you have the same experience, or is that just something going on in me?
Thank you, brother. It's always good to see you. I always appreciate your service and being in your presence. So thank you for being here, man. Man, that happens with everybody I know. Everybody. And in fact, we're going to read all the way through it coming up in these chapters, the thoughts, the ideas, the beliefs, the attitudes, He acquired such an idea, or the thought occurred, it will say, or suddenly, he believed that he could take a drink without danger. I mean, over and over and over, it's going to give those examples. But what happens is we end up taking actions based on those thoughts and beliefs. And that's what triggers that phenomenon of craving. That demands more of the same. So for me, if I don't hitch a horse and buggy to those thoughts, they're not going anywhere. But whenever they overwhelm me to the point where I do, and like we were talking about, I'm so restless, I'm so irritable and discontent that I got to do something to make that stop. And if I'm not very far along in the steps, or if my sponsor doesn't have me looking at 10 and 11 on a regular basis as he's working me through this book, I'm in big trouble, because I'm going to become restless, irritable, and discontent. I'm not going to know what to do with that. And people in the fellowship say, well, just go to more meetings, just read more books, talk to more guys. I do all that, and I still get drunk, I get loaded, or I act out. So to answer your question, everybody I know on this meeting and beyond, that it always starts with that thought process. So really, the book says that's the essence of a spiritual experience, is that awareness of it. And to begin, that's what we're really looking to recover from, is that hopeless state of mind. So good to see you out. Thanks, bro.